The rings of power were not instruments of conquest, but tools for the absolute corruption of the soul. They were the masterstroke of a fallen spirit who sought not to rule the world, but to bind it in a metaphysical chain, enslaving the very will of its most powerful guardians. The conflict they ignited would not be for a single kingdom, but for the very future of all free peoples, a war so vast it makes the struggle for Gondor seem but a prelude. This is the story of the Second Age, an age of deceptive light and the deepest shadow, when the world was remade by a promise and broken by a secret. The tale begins not with war, but with a profound and sorrowful peace. The great enemy, Morgoth, was vanquished, cast into the outer void at the end of the First Age. His chief lieutenant, Sauron, had bent the knee in feigned repentance, only to slip away into the shadows of the east as the world healed. For 1,000 years, a fragile tranquility settled over Middle-earth. The race of men flourished, and the great island kingdom of Númenor rose from the sea, a gift to the faithful Edain. The elves, though diminished, dwelt in peace in Lindon under their high king, Gil-galad. Yet for the elves, peace was a bittersweet poison. They were bound to the circles of the world, and they could feel its slow, inexorable decay. They, the firstborn, were fading as the dominion of men began its ascent. Their deepest yearning was not for power, but for permanence. They longed to halt the slow march of time, to preserve the beauty of Middle-earth as they had first known it, untarnished and immortal. This longing, this noble and desperate grief, was the key that would unlock their doom. Into this world of weary light walked a figure of unparalleled beauty and wisdom. He called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He claimed to be an emissary of the Valar, sent to aid the peoples of Middle-earth and share with them the knowledge they had been denied. He was fair of form, and his words were a balm, promising to teach the arts and sciences that could turn Middle-earth into a paradise, to rival even Valinor itself. The High King Gil-galad and the wisest of the elves, like Elrond, saw through the guise. They sensed a shadow behind the light and refused him entry into their lands. But not all were so discerning. Annatar traveled to the elven realm of Eregion, near the Misty Mountains and the dwarf kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Here dwelt the Gwaith-i-Mírdain, the people of the jewel-smiths, the most skilled elven craftsmen since the passing of Fëanor himself. Their leader was Celebrimbor, grandson of Fëanor, and in him burned the same fire of creation, the same insatiable thirst for knowledge and the making of things of great beauty. Annatar's words found fertile ground in Celebrimbor's heart. He spoke to the smiths' deepest desire, offering them the secrets to arrest the decay they so dreaded. He taught them arts beyond their imagining, secrets of ringcraft, and the binding of power into physical form. For years, Annatar was a friend and a mentor in Eregion, and the skill of the Elven-smiths grew to its zenith. But the knowledge Annatar shared was a poison, sweetened with truth, and the elves, in their thirst to preserve beauty, were about to drink it to the dregs. Under his guidance, they began the forging of the rings of power. Over many decades, they labored. The first they made were the 7 and the 9. These 16 rings were a collaborative effort, forged by the elves, but, according to the lore, and with the direct aid of Annatar, they were powerful, capable of enhancing the innate abilities of their wearers, warding off the weariness of time, and enabling the building of great wealth and kingdoms. The elves of Eregion poured their hopes and their mastery into these artifacts, believing they were creating the tools to preserve their fading world. They were creating the instruments of their own enslavement. Once this work was complete, Annatar's purpose in Eregion was fulfilled. He departed, his teachings having taken root. But Celebrimbor's creative fire was not quenched. His skill had now surpassed even that of his teacher. Alone, and in secret, he forged 3 more rings, free from the corrupting touch of Annatar. These were the 3 rings of the elves: Narya, the ring of fire; Nenya, the ring of adamant and water; and Vilya, the ring of air, mightiest of the 3. Their power was not for domination, but for understanding, healing, and preservation. They were the elves' purest creation. But all the rings, even the 3 forged in secret, were still made using the dark science taught by Annatar. They were all bound to a single, unseen formula, a terrible loophole he had woven into the very fabric of their creation. In the heart of his dark land of Mordor, Annatar finally shed his fair disguise. He was revealed as Sauron, the Dark Lord, the heir of Morgoth. There, in the fires of Orodruin, the Mountain of Doom, he forged one final ring, a master ring. Into this one he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. It was the one ring, the vessel of his power, and the key to his entire design. As he placed it upon his finger, A shockwave of malevolence radiated across Middle-earth. And as he spoke the incantation in the black speech of Mordor, the elves, thousands of miles away, heard him. His voice entered their minds, a foul intrusion into their innermost thoughts. They knew him, and they knew they had been utterly betrayed. In that moment of terrible revelation, they understood the purpose of all the rings of power. The 16 were designed to ensnare their bearers, and the 3, though pure in their making, would only serve to amplify the power of the one. The elves immediately took off their rings, their grand project of preservation now a monument to their folly. Their secret was laid bare, and their hope had turned to ash. Sauron's rage was absolute. His plan to silently ensnare the elven lords had failed at the final moment. But his power was now at its peak, tied to the ruling ring on his finger. He no longer needed subtlety. He demanded that all the rings of power be surrendered to him, claiming that they would not have been possible without his lore. The elves refused, and so began the War of the Elves and Sauron. It was a conflict of devastating brutality. Sauron's legions swept out of Mordor, a tide of darkness that crashed against the green lands of Eregion. Eregion, the beautiful city of the Smiths, was the first to fall. It was completely annihilated. Sauron himself entered the city and stormed the house of the Myrdain, seizing the 9 rings and the 7. In the ruins of his home, Celebrimbor stood against the Dark Lord. He was captured and put to torment. Sauron demanded the location of the 3, the most powerful of the rings after the 1. Celebrimbor revealed the whereabouts of the 7 and the 9 under torture, for their making was known to Sauron, but he would not break concerning the 3. He died in agony, his body hung upon a pole and used as a banner as Sauron's armies marched on. The elves were scattered and broken. Sauron's forces pushed westward, laying waste to all of Eregion. The elven kingdom of Lindon, ruled by High King Gil-galad, was all that stood against him, and its armies were besieged, its back to the sea. Middle-earth was on the verge of falling completely under his dominion. For a time, there was peace, but the rings of power were now at play. Seeds of darkness planted in the hearts of dwarves and men. And in Mordor, a defeated Dark Lord was learning a new way to wage war. Not with armies, but with whispers. Sauron, possessing the 16 rings, began to distribute them. To the 7 great lords of the dwarves, he gave 7 rings. He hoped to bend their wills to his, but the dwarves proved too stubborn and resilient to be dominated. They could not be turned into shadows. Instead, the rings amplified their natural desire for gold and treasure, igniting a consuming greed that brought ruin and conflict to their people. The 9 rings he gave to men, great kings, sorcerers, and warriors of that age. Men proved far more susceptible to the rings' power. The rings gave them immense wealth, long life, and the ability to command. But one by one, their lives stretched until existence became a weary torment. They fell, utterly and completely, under the dominion of the One Ring. They faded from the world of the living, becoming wraiths, the Nazgul, the ring-wraiths. They were now his most terrible servants, bound to his will alone. While the Nazgul were taking shape, a new power was growing to challenge Sauron. The island kingdom of Numenor had reached its golden age. The Númenóreans, descendants of the men who aided the elves in the First Age, were now the most powerful mortals the world had ever seen. They established colonies and fortresses along the coasts of Middle-earth, and they saw the shadow growing once more in Mordor. Sauron, styling himself the King of Men, began to assail these coastal strongholds. The king of Numenor at this time was J.R.R. Pharazôn the Golden, the most proud and powerful ruler in the island's history. He would not suffer a rival. Hearing of Sauron's challenge, he did not send an army. He assembled an armada, a fleet so vast, so magnificent, and so terrifying, that the very coasts of Middle-earth were said to groan under their landing. He sailed to the shores of Mordor itself. The might of Numenor was so overwhelming, its soldiers so tall and fierce, that the armies of Sauron, the Orcs, and the Easterlings fled without a fight. They deserted their master in terror. Sauron was left utterly alone, his military power broken by a mere show of force. His fortress of Barad-dûr was no defense against such a foe. His defeat was total, or so it seemed. Sauron, the great deceiver, humbled himself. He came forth from his tower, put aside his power, and surrendered to J.R.R. Pharazôn. The Númenóreans took him as a hostage, a prisoner, to be brought back to their perfect island as a testament to their victory. They believed they had ended the threat of the Dark Lord forever. They were wrong. They were leading the serpent into their own garden, and his poison would drown their world in the sea. Sauron was being taken to the one place where his malice could achieve a ruin greater than any army could ever hope to accomplish. But here's a question that changes everything. What if being captured wasn't a defeat? What if this humiliation, this apparent surrender, was Sauron's most cunning and most terrible gambit yet. He had seen the might of Numenor. He knew he could not break them with steel. So he would break them from within, using the one weapon against which their shining armor offered no defense: their own pride. Initially, Sauron was kept as a high-ranking prisoner in the gleaming city of Armenelos. He feigned humility and repentance, and with his vast knowledge and silver tongue, he began to advise the Númenóreans. He taught them secrets of craft and lore they had never known, winning the admiration of many. In just 3 years, he went from captive to the king's most trusted advisor. Ar-Pharazôn, now growing old, was consumed by a growing fear of his own mortality, and in this fear, Sauron found the perfect crack in his soul to exploit. Sauron played upon the single greatest fear of the long-lived Númenóreans: death. He twisted their minds with poison. He told them that death was not the natural gift of their creator, but a curse laid upon them by the jealous Valar, the gods in the west. He painted the Undying Lands not as a hallowed place, but as a paradise, selfishly hoarded by the immortal elves, and he offered them an alternative, a new master, one who could grant them the one thing they craved above all else: eternal life. He spoke to them of the Lord of Darkness, Melkor, his first master, whom he now called the Giver of Freedom. A dark cult began to spread through the pristine cities of Númenor like a plague. Those loyal to the Valar, known as the Faithful, were persecuted, driven into hiding, or publicly denounced. The white cities of the island were slowly choked by shadow, and at the heart of it all, Sauron directed the construction of a new temple, a mighty edifice built upon the highest hill, dedicated to Melkor. And upon its great altar, Sauron offered human sacrifices to the shadow, beginning with the captured faithful. The ultimate symbol of Númenor's grace was Nimloth, the white tree, whose ancestor was a gift from the elves. It was a living connection to the light of the Valar. Sauron, now high priest of Melkor, demanded it be destroyed. For a time, the king hesitated, but his fear of death, fanned into a raging fire by Sauron's whispers, overpowered his reverence. He took an axe and struck the first blow himself. The beautiful tree was hewn down and burned upon the altar. The smoke that rose from its pyre was black and foul, staining the sky for 7 days, a visible omen of the doom to come. With the heart of Númenor corrupted and its soul given over to darkness, Sauron played his final card. He told Ar-Pharazôn that immortality could be seized by force, that the Valar were not gods, but mere guardians who could be overthrown. He convinced the king that if he, a mortal, were to set foot on the Undying Lands, he would live forever. Driven mad by pride and the terror of oblivion, Ar-Pharazôn began the greatest armament the world had ever known. For 9 years, the forges of Númenor rang with the sound of hammers, building a fleet unlike any seen before or since. Sauron's victory was almost complete. He had turned the greatest power of men into a weapon aimed directly at the heart of the world, at the very land of the gods themselves. But here is the terrifying, hidden truth of his plan. Sauron never believed for a second that this great armada could triumph. He wasn't arming Númenor for a victory. He was orchestrating its suicide. Why? Why engineer a plan that was guaranteed to fail? Because Sauron understood power on a cosmic scale. He knew the Valar, the guardians of the world, were forbidden from using their full might against men. He was creating a situation so blasphemous, so utterly unforgivable, that it would force a higher power to act. He was trying to provoke God himself. The great armament set sail under a sky that had grown dark and ominous. Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, clad in shining armor, stood on the prow of his flagship, Alcarandas, feeling himself the master of the world. He sailed west, breaking the ban of the Valar, a prohibition set in place since the island's founding. Finally, they saw it. The shores of the Undying Lands, the blessed realm of Valinor. A strange silence hung in the air. The land was beautiful beyond comprehension, but utterly empty. Valar had retreated, leaving the beaches open. It was a test, a final chance for Ar-Pharazôn to turn back. But the king's pride was now a fire that consumed all reason. He gave the order. He stepped onto the shore and claimed the land for himself. And in that moment, the world held its breath. The Valar laid down their guardianship of the world and called upon the One, Eru Ilúvatar. And the creator of all intervened directly. A great chasm opened in the sea between Númenor and the Undying Lands. The entire fleet of Ar-Pharazôn, the mightiest ever assembled, was swallowed by the abyss. The king himself and the soldiers who followed him onto the shore were buried under falling hills, trapped in the caves of the Forgotten until the end of the world. And then, Ilúvatar remade the world. The Undying Lands were taken away. removed forever from the physical circles of the earth. The world, which had been flat, was bent and made round. For the elves, a straight road remained, a mystical path only their ships could sail to the west. For men, the path was gone forever. All seas now led back to where they began. And what of Numenor itself? The very heart of the cataclysm fell upon the star-shaped island. The foundations of the land were broken. The earth split apart, fire and smoke belching from its core. A wave of impossible size, a mountain of dark water, rose from the deep and fell upon the land, devouring it whole. And Sauron? He was there, in his temple, at the very center of the ruin. He had not expected an intervention of this magnitude. He had miscalculated the sheer power of Iluvatar. As the island sank, his physical body was destroyed in the cataclysm, but his spirit, being immortal, endured. He was stripped of his power to take on a fair form ever again. His ability to deceive with a handsome face was lost forever. He was now a being of pure malice, a dark spirit born on a black wind, fleeing the wreckage of his own victory. He had lost his body, his prize captive, and a kingdom he controlled. But to him, the price was worth it. His greatest enemy, the might and glory of the men of the West, now lay drowned at the bottom of the sea. The board was cleared, and back in Middle-earth, his one ring was waiting. But even in this uttermost ruin, one light was not extinguished. Forewarned by a dream, the last of the faithful, led by the noble Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion, had refused the summons of the king. They had boarded their own ships, 9 in all, anchored to the east of the island, and watched the coming of the doom from afar. They were swept away by the fury of the storm that remade the world. Their sails were torn, their masts were broken, but they were not destroyed. A great wind from the west, a wind of salvation, filled their ragged sails and drove them on, eastward, ever eastward, fleeing the ruin of their home. After many long weeks at sea, they saw land, the shores of Middle-earth. They had lost their home, their people, their star-shaped island of bliss. They were exiles, but they carried with them the memory of what was lost, and the seeds of a new beginning. And so, in the lands of their exile, the survivors of the downfall founded new kingdoms, Arnor in the north, and Gondor in the south. They built great cities, Minas Anor and Minas Ithil, and the watchtower of Osgiliath on the river. The legacy of Numenor, its wisdom and its valor, would live on. But they were not alone. The shadow that had caused their ruin had also returned. Sauron's spirit, bodiless and burning with rage, came back to his fortress of Barad-dûr. There, in the fires of Mount Doom, he slowly forged a new body for himself, no longer fair, but terrible and strong. And he took up again his ruling ring. The second age of the world was drawing to its bloody conclusion. The enemy was revealed, the board was set, and the final war for the freedom of Middle-earth was about to begin. The War of the Last Alliance, the tale of elves and men, who would stand together one last time against the darkness. The fall of Numenor was an end, but it was also a beginning. The great tales are never truly over. They are threads in a tapestry woven through time, a song of sorrow and of hope that echoes from the creation of the world to its very last day. These are the tales that forged the world of the ring. This story, and all the stories that came before it, are our shared legacy. To ensure this great chronicle continues, to keep the light of the elder days from fading into myth, join the fellowship. Subscribe to the _Silmarillion_chronicle.